So for starters, I'm going to be splitting this review into two parts. The first part will cover the entire story arc of the original release of God Eater, as I believe it to be kind of the bulkiest part of the game story-wise. So without further ado, God Eater Resurrection is a Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition level remaster of God Eater Burst. Burst is an extended release of the original God Eater game, with all the DLC included plus a continuation of the main story. Resurrection takes the visuals of God Eater Burst and enhances them with new models for all the characters. It also up-res the textures for environments and monsters, and it adds one final arc to the first game. So is God Eater Resurrection as good as I remember it? No, not at all. Don't get me wrong, this is a good game. The time hasn't been especially kind to it, especially with the most recent entry, which we will talk about in several weeks to a few months. So the general concept of gameplay is the same between all three versions. However, between God Eater and God Eater Burst, there were some balance changes. From what I could find, as I have not played the original release and do not really have the time to find a copy and play it, the original God Eater's gameplay was much more gun-focused. There were a lot of balance issues between weapons and elements that made some obviously better than others. Burst worked to change that by altering some of the values and making it less skewed in one direction. Resurrection took the route of adding Predator styles to the combat, which we will get into in a bit. God Eater is a pretty standard game in terms of depth. Weapons in this game are called God Arcs. Each God Arc can be equipped with a close-range weapon and a shield, or a long-range weapon. However, the player character, among a few other cast members, are new types. New type God Eaters are capable of wielding God Arcs with both a close and long-range weapon, as well as a shield. So, you're pretty versatile. There are 6 close-range weapons, 4 gun types, and 3 shields. You may be tempted to utilize just close-range or just long-range, but the game is at its best when both are used together. Close-range combat is pretty simple. You have normal attacks and heavy attacks, along with a special action. These weapon types each have different damage properties of slashing, crushing, or piercing. Monsters known as origami are weak to specific damage types in different areas of their bodies, so hitting the right place is essential. Long-range weapons are a bit more complex. The 4 gun types offer 4 different playstyles. For one, Sniper works best when you aim down on an enemy and hit it at their weak point. I'd argue that this is a really difficult gun to use due to how much the monsters move in this game, and each sniper shot also costs you a decent amount of your OP. Your HP, OP, and stamina are your resources, essentially. OP are your bullets that you can use, and they recharge as you hit enemies and when you're in burst, which we'll also talk about later. If you don't want to think too much about shooting, assault guns are much more your style, since you can just button mash. Shotguns are a bit more focused in my opinion, since you have to get close to the enemy, but they're not that much more difficult than the assault rifle. Cannons are a bit more interesting, since you have to store your OP in order to fire certain bullets, and you can fire off bullets that take more than 1 bar of OP, which is pretty cool since they do a lot of damage. Shields are pretty simple. Bucklers will decrease damage upon a successful block and deploy the fastest. Regular shields will decrease damage, but deploy a bit more slower. Tower shields deploy the slowest, but they negate damage and use up stamina instead. One of the key mechanics in God Eater's combat system is Burst. By pressing a combination of buttons on your controller, you can use a move called Devour. Upon successful execution, this puts your character in an amped up state. This state can increase up to level 3, and provides various buffs such as OP regeneration, increased attack speed, double jumps, and increased movement options. Maintaining burst is a key element to combat, and doing so will make fights easier. In Resurrection, Predator styles allow you to customize how your Devour functions. You can go for faster Devour techniques, which place you far enough from the enemy to safely complete your Devour, or you can choose more risky, slower Devours, which give more reward for their risk. God Eater also features a decent lock-on system, which actually follows the monster in a mostly non-nauseating fashion. However, the camera still has some problems, which are due to the age of the game. Outside of combat, you have a small hub known as the Far East Branch. It's not really anything special. You mostly use it as a setting to progress the plot and accept missions. Here you can talk to your allies, customize your loadout, your appearance, and buy items from the shop. All in all, Resurrection's gameplay seems like a lot to learn, but it's a lot less daunting when you start playing, and everything seamlessly flows together. Take one step at a time, and don't forget to upgrade your gear as well. Shields serve as armor in this game, so you'll want to keep an eye on that. In terms of monster design, I think most of the monsters are pretty fairly designed. It's pretty easy to read their attacks, and if you're new to Monster Hunting-esque games, I think this is a great place to start, since the game offers you a defensive option with every weapon. Presentation-wise, the visuals are pretty much up-res to PSP graphics, barring the character models, which are completely redone. Animations retain a bit of their old feel, and a lot of the emotional scenes might lose their impact with characters staring expressionlessly as they yell and cry. Some animations are really aggressive for no reason, and what I mean to say here is that the age of the game really shows, especially in this first arc of the game. The first arc doesn't take an approach of changing the animations that existed in the PSP version, and this typically also goes for expressions that the characters would have on their faces. In the first arc of the game, you'll notice the older feel a lot more, and a lot of the cutscenes are structured very similarly throughout the game, which I'll mention later. For what it's worth, the music is pretty decent. A lot of tracks are designed to keep you in the fight and keep your blood pumping. They're usually high energy when you're in the field, and at least bearable when you're not. However, oftentimes the game versus cutscene volume is a little weird. You'll probably want the game to be a bit lower in volume since it gets louder in cutscenes, and I don't think there's a way to adjust that, though I could be wrong. You'll also likely take note that character voice lines don't always cut off. When you complete missions, you can select passive skills to increase the chance of certain rewards. These voice lines the characters say will play out until they're done or until you've progressed to the load screen. It's really funny, and it's not really bothersome, but I thought I'd mention it. Okay, so you might be thinking, well, I want a good multiplayer game to play with my friends. This should be good, like Monster Hunter, right? No. Modern Monster Hunter games have a drop-in, drop-out lobby system where the player can come in whenever they want and drop out whenever they want. God Eater Resurrection, as well as other games in the series, do not function like that at all. So you have to set up a lobby before loading into your game. Then you have to add your friends to that lobby, then start the game. You can't join a lobby in progress. Of course, this isn't exactly rare for some games, I'd say, but the multiplayer system is deeply flawed due to this. Additionally, there is a load screen lock that happens sometimes when playing the game with more than 2 players, meaning you're stuck on an infinite load screen. This issue existed in the original Burst, but also persisted in this version. If it's any help, one player can drop out of the game forcefully, and the loading will proceed. But this issue is consistent in my experience, so I recommend you only play with 2 players total, or you play with someone who is not really interested in farming materials. Finally, you can't progress this game story together. What I mean to say is that only the host's progress is saved. This is a very strange choice and was not fixed between the remaster of Burst and Resurrection. The multiplayer of God Eater Resurrection is a bit messy, and I heavily recommend that you take that into consideration if you plan to play this with others. To put it simply, I think the story of God Eater, not including Burst and Resurrection, is decent. The pacing is kind of relying on how quickly you choose to progress missions. You're gonna have to accept the fact that if you're progressing quickly, there will be times where the time doesn't necessarily feel like it's passed properly. Despite that fact, you play as a silent protagonist, and honestly, it feels like you're just another character involved in the overarching plot, as opposed to a well-fleshed-out main character. What I mean to say is that you are not the star of this story, of the first arc of the game. You are in fact a character who is skilled and heavily involved in moving the plot along, but you are not the main character, the essential character that everyone goes to, and not the central focus of the game. And this approach is honestly pretty refreshing. It makes a lot of characters less reliant on you outside of a few scenes. You're a lot less central but still important, and I think that works out better for this story. There are some weird bits where a character will ask you a question, but in the first arc of the game you don't have the ability to speak in cutscenes, and you don't have answer choices you can select, so the game will continue as if you've responded. Now you could say some of the dialogue has aged, and I would agree, but everything that has been done so is a product of its time. There's a lot to unpack here without spoiling much, so I'll give you a simple rundown. The story itself is a lot stronger than Monster Hunter World or Monster Hunter Rise. The characters get actual development, and there's a decent amount of content packed into the first arc of the game. You may find it difficult to stomach it sometimes if you're someone who doesn't like anime, but for the most part I think it's enjoyable. It's not perfect, of course, but it's good. God Eater's first arc, along with the gameplay of Resurrection, both make a solid game. There's a decent challenge to be had in the game, and a solid story to tell. That being said, its age shows. The fact that Bandai did not go back and fix some older bugs is kind of a pain to deal with, and I wouldn't blame you for actively avoiding this game because of those bugs. However, I do hope that you'll give it a chance. The story not forcing the main character to be the centerpiece for the entire plot is pretty nice. It helps give other characters a chance to shine and gain some actual development without the need for your protagonist moment. You still do play parts in the development of certain characters, but you are not the central figure piece to the whole story. So I'm gonna give the original God Eater a good old 7 out of 10. It's solid. So the rest of this video is gonna be dedicated to some spoiler talk. Before you go, if you enjoyed, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, so you know when my next video goes live. Comment down below your thoughts on the first arc of Resurrection, but also please be kind to others and tag your spoilers if there are any below. I'll do my best to answer any questions you may have as well if you're curious about the game and want to know more. Thanks for watching this far. Alright, spoilers time. So God Eater's first arc really does cement a few things to me. Since you're more of just a character in the main story rather than the full focus, you get a chance to experience a lot of development between characters in game. Of course, you could easily approach this with making your character a non-silent protagonist, but that's a lot of work for a 2010 game where you create your own character. A lot of the early stuff in the game is just introducing you to basic concepts. Lindow gets weeded out pretty early in the story, but his loss is central to the main plot, and I think it's a decent choice to rid the story of the strong veteran, though it is very common. But it's also nice to see he serves a purpose beyond the grave. He doesn't just die for the sake of one character's development, he dies for the sake of the plot moving along. Alisa's mental issues are tackling an interesting topic, and it's mostly trauma, but I'm glad that it's not so simple as the power of friendship that helps her overcome it. That being said, it is especially convenient that the player character gets to resonate with her in some way that will allow you to see that she's being hypnotized. Like I said, some level of character development is done with your character involved. Speaking of Alisa and Lindow, I think the Diauspida boss fight is by far one of my favorites in the series, in Resurrection specifically, because Diauspida in Resurrection sprouts his wings at 75% health, instead of the usual, when I get low, I will become more powerful. He decides, oh damn, you're hurting me a little, well, I'm just gonna use my strongest move, and that's really cool. And I love that boss fight, because all of Diauspida's attacks are very easy to counteract. I think that that's a really good approach for a good boss fight, is that the attacks are easy to counteract, but if you don't know and you're not patient enough, you're going to get blasted by it. Of course, this boss fight is every new player's worst nightmare, as it was mine originally as well, but it's slowly become my favorite boss fight in the entire series. Moving on, Sakuya kind of goes out of her way to do the whole Aegis mission and kind of find out what Aegis is once Lindow dies, and I like that she does that on her own with the help of Alisa coming in to save her, and it's not the main character coming in instead. It's not the player character just happening to show up because plot needs you to be there. Instead, they have other characters who are more interesting than your main character show up to certain key events. I think the fact that there are moments where the player character is not involved works out very nicely for the story, and makes me enjoy it a little more. Kota kind of struggles with people. He's not the most likable character, as he kind of starts off with that best friend trope kind of character, but there's a moment where he's faced with the choice of protecting his family or destroying their chance at a new life. That's a little harsh, but it's not perfectly executed, but I do like how he comes to terms with the fact that his happiness and their happiness are not exactly the same, and that his happiness comes at the cost of so many others. Soma is, by and large, the main character of this arc. I think he starts off kind of edgy and irritable. He's the kind of guy who doesn't want anything to do with you, but as you start to go through the story, you find that most of that is a guise. Soma acts the way he does because he knows the pain of loss. He carries a lot of baggage, and it's best to keep away from him because of his fear of people dying on his watch. Through this entire arc, he actually softens his tone when speaking to you, and his irritation fades in most places. As he connects with Shio, who is similar to him, he kind of softens himself, and it's a very nice character development, although it kind of does happen a little quickly depending on how you progress the game. The funny thing is that Soma's entire character is some kind of main character stuff. He's the first God Eater who was born with the bias factor inside of him. He's essentially the special child, and he is the character who performs the final action to save the world alongside the only other person he loves. He gets the whole ending monologue as well. No matter the flaws I see in this game, I still love it. The characters and the gameplay are both things that I feel like I won't get enough of anytime soon. So check back soon because I will be posting more God Eater content in the future. Maybe next week, or maybe later. It depends on if anything else comes up in the coming few weeks, but soon for sure, because I'm going to continue this for as long as I can. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.
She is free.
He's not even close! He's not even close!